rubs up against sometimes the calling of our life. I believe Paul the Apostle experienced that. So let's go back first century for just a second. Paul the Apostle has an experience with Jesus, and he believes that Jesus that he met on that Damascus road is now going to take him and use him for a force for the kingdom. He is totally convinced that he can persuade Jews and Gentiles alike to believe in Jesus, and that his position in the Jewish strata is now going to really help him. What he comes to find out is both sides sandbag him. The Jews that formerly saw him as a brother ostracize him, and the Gentiles won't accept him because they think it's all a shell game. So for 10 years you hear nothing. 10 years, approximately 10 years, you hear nothing from Paul. Why? Well, I believe because God was working something in him. He was causing him to go back over the scriptures and see scriptures in light of the risen Messiah. And he was relearning. And yet, he became one of the great forces for the kingdom. Because one day, a brother named Barnabas came and got him, and Tarsus brought him to the Antioch church, and he became a force for the kingdom for Gentile believers that were dispersed across the world. So I tell you that story because, well, hold on, brother. There may be a time. You may be in the incubator between, the land between, where God is working on you, preparing you for a season of revelation and a produce for the kingdom. So just hold on. Right, hold on. Other questions? Yes? I don't know if you right? To use us for ministry for other people that are going through those seasons. For example, I think of like Celebrate Recovery, prison ministries, etc. Things like that where a person has been through a trying experience and then God uses that in their life to do ministry with other people. It sounds like you've been through maybe a painful divorce or separation, and then for you, ministering to people during that cycle brings out maybe some pain of your past, right? And then you want to hopefully do something that helps people on the other side prevent the issues from happening, keeping marriages together. I think that's good. I've always kind of categorized ministry as a leader of ministry to help me to understand different seasons of ministry. So I'm going to give you some names that might help. There are certain ministries that help to move certain people from hurting to healing. There's a lot of those ministries, especially men's ministry. And then there are other ministries that move people from healing to thriving. And we need ministries on both sides of the equation. In fact, sometimes we need more from healing to thriving than we do just on the pain side, because unfortunately, pain is man's greatest teacher. And it's easy to go there. At the same time, your heart might not be ready to be drawn back in to the pain of the past, and maybe you need to move into something that is more of the healing to thriving side of ministry. I'd encourage you to look for it, because we need plenty of those ministries. Other questions? Yeah, right here.
How have you developed men to be talkers? And I live 2 hours north of here, so we're really rural, really inward thinking. How would you draw that out of guys other than just sitting there in a group and pointedly asking them, and they say, I don't know?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, because we are in the Midwest, right? You have to draw it out of them. So here's some of the tactics that I use is, when I'm in a group and I'm facilitating, I try not to teach too much. Because I know that there's a spirit that moves between believers, especially when we open up God's Word, and I'm wanting to pull things out of people is what I'm wanting to do. But it requires a little bit of kind of a keen understanding of people's lives, their experiences, to call on people once in a while and say, hey Dave, I know you experienced something like this. What's your wisdom for moments like this? Or to call them out and draw them into the conversation. There are many times that I just start groups with an idea or scripture and I just let it go. And I help them to see how their ideas are connected together, drawing them back into God's Word, keep asking questions. You know, Jesus was a master at the Socratic method. He used it all the time. I mean, if you go back and you really listen to Jesus and read the red letters, you're going to discover sometimes he answered questions with questions. Rich young ruler, what must I do to be saved? Jesus says, what's written in the law? You know why? Because he understands that the person asking questions holds all the power, holds all the cards. And it gives them that opportunity to draw them out. And yes, by the way, when you're sitting in a men's group, this is just a lesson for you. You have to actually disciple, meaning retrain their brain to think differently about relationships and the Bible and conversation and the whole bit. And it is hard. It takes time. Sometimes you're going to have to put a bit in their mouth and pull on it, yank a little bit to get them to turn out of their silence. But I would just encourage you, the longer you're with it, the better it's going to get. The more you pull out of them, eventually you'll resurrect a spirit of conversation inside of that group, and you'll be blessed by it. And eventually you're like, want them to shut up, like once in a while too. So you get to a point that you're trying to make. I hope that helps. Little tactic I've used. Yeah, right here.
Men's groups that I've been a part of in the past, I've enjoyed the most are denomination. Really, how can we take an event like this and create that? Or, is it better to maybe do men's ministry within our own churches and collaborate as we get more comfortable and just start, but build towards more interdenominational connections from that? Maybe not necessarily an event like this, but week to week, month to month. Iron sharpens iron kind of discussion. What is the best way to go?
Yeah.
Church or to consider
What's your first name?
Dave?
Dave. Okay, so Dave was asking, what is the best way to gather men together? There's no wrong way. It's just not doing it is the only way I would say not to do it. So, but with that, I would tell you this one story. So when I started leading all those groups around the Twin Cities, I noticed that there were people from a lot of different churches and a lot of different strata of faith, but that they were all hungry. And here's a piece of gold I would give you, is men actually need a little bit of autonomy. I think sometimes groups within a church are very threatening to men. They're threatening because, especially in a small church, because guess what? That man knows your wife. And it puts you in a really uncomfortable position to be transparent, doesn't it? And I have found that men who are in mixed groups where with guys that they don't know, they can kind of play their cards a little bit. It's kind of like having a conversation, or it used to be kind of like having a conversation with a stranger on the plane. You'll tell a stranger on the plane almost anything, but you won't tell your boss anything because there's more to risk with your boss, with your friend, who knows your wife. And why? Because the risk is greater, but there's less risk with people that we don't know. I found that some of my most successful groups started with people who didn't know each other, who became friends and then knew each other. They developed deeper bonds quicker. Deeper bonds quicker because there were fewer obstacles in the relationship. So my encouragement would be, yes, start a group. Yes, you can try in your church, but be cautious because men are going to be cautious. You have to create a little bit of an autonomous environment because men are ashamed to admit they don't know the Bible, that they got sin going on in their lives, that their marriage is falling apart, that their finances are a wreck. They're ashamed to admit all those things. But they do want to be with other men once in a while to learn about God. And that's scary for men. It's scary. It is absolutely 100% scary. So I would just say to you, I would just start with a group of guys, honestly, outside. I found that outside the culture of a church brings down some walls. And then men that maybe don't know each other is a good way to start because they're willing to take a few more risks there. But after you start it, you better have enough charisma to lead that group because it's going to be your charisma that's going to hold it together. It's not going to be the church, not going to be the program, not going to be the content. It's going to be you because all those guys are trusting you to bring them together because they don't know each other. And they're trusting you to lead them the way. I hope that helps. Yeah, right here.
Hey, you ever find yourself discouraged with men?
Oh.
You know, and I think it kind of wants to make you separate or put distance between sometimes when you have such a passion, you know, and you're just being hurt or deceived or, you know, that type of stuff.
Yeah, I've had this happen to me a couple of times. We'll keep it in the room, mostly. But a couple of times on my board, I've had men that have had moral failures. Those were the most painful to me. Because many times those men hide those issues for years and you don't even know they're going on. They're supposed to be some of your best friends. Those are the ones that hurt the most, to be honest. And they do create a little bit of a wound or a scar on you about it. But I will give you one thing that has saved me. I am a persistent individual. If I say I'm going to start something, I'm going to finish it. And I just realized when I got into this thing, I was going to do it for the rest of my life. In fact, you just heard, I just made a 22-year and 11-month plan, which is crazy when you think about it. But I think persistence and commitment wins. I do. And we have to be committed beyond the circumstances and beyond the issues of people, because there are plenty of other people out there who need to hear the message of the kingdom. That's what keeps me going. It's just I have discipline, commitment. That's just who I am, and it just oozes out of me. So I'll be around here if God is willing for another 22 years and 11 months, and I'm just going to keep pursuing men. And if they break my heart or God's heart, so be it. It's just the way it is sometimes. I hope that serves your question well. So yeah, right here. Okay, I don't know. Tell me your first name. Frank just said, what do you do if you don't feel confident in your communication ability? And I would say to you, there are things that you can find your confidence in. Number one, we can find our confidence in Jesus Christ, right? That's number one. That's first and foremost. I think that's where our identity comes from. Knowing that there's going to be times that you don't feel confident. But I guarantee you right here that Frank is confident in something. Something. There's something that he's confidently educated in better than anybody else in this room. And that could be a form of sin. Right? We're all sinners sitting in this room, redeemed by God's grace, mercy, love, and forgiveness. And I know this. There's a lot of experts in this room that think that sometimes your inability to be able to communicate the message is what's going to keep you from engaging in ministry. I would say false. Moses. False. Timothy. False. I mean, it's not true. It's not true. You're going to have to speak back and preach back to that voice and step into it. I mean, I remember the first moment I stepped onto a stage as a teacher. No kidding, this actually happened to me. This is a true story. College, first year, first class, speech class. I had to sign up for a communication class. And I got two choices. It was either theater or communication. And I didn't want to do theater because I didn't see myself as a thespian. And so I went to this communication class. There was 8 kids in this class. And here was the syllabus. You have to give 5-minute talks, and the kids in the class evaluate you, which sounds totally unenjoyable. So, guess what? I drew straws, and I got to go first. Even more unenjoyable. You know what's worse about this whole situation? I've been a Christian for 3 months. 3 months. Now taking a class in college, giving a 5-minute talk, and I didn't even know if I could do it. But the pastor, or the guy in the class who was teaching the class, gave us his book as a textbook. How arrogant of him to do that. But he gave us his text, and I just followed the text, and I spoke. I gave a 5-minute talk, and then the class eviscerated me, because I went first. It did not feel good. It felt like an enema. is what it felt like. I mean, I felt like I got cleaned out in front of a whole class of kids. And then from there on out, everybody got softer on evaluating the kids that came next. As soon as I got done, the teacher looked at me and he says, I want to talk to you after class. And I thought I was in trouble. All right? Everybody leaves. He calls me up front. His name was Dr. Patterson, and he said to me, Vince, I saw you at the church I attend this last week. Do you attend there? I just said, yeah. He said, well, I'm going to be gone next week. Would you teach my class for me? And because I realized I wasn't in trouble, I said, sure. Which was stupid, by the way, because then he next said to me, there's 100 kids, college kids in this class. They're all juniors and seniors. I was a freshman. He said, and by the way, I'm on the book of Ecclesiastes, teach chapter 12. And I left. I've been a Christian for 3 months, spoken one time for 5 minutes, and never read the book of Ecclesiastes in my life. I went back to my room, read it, discovered that everything in it was meaningless, and began to think to myself, why am I talking on the book of Ecclesiastes? So I prepped a little message, I got it all ready, showed up for church that day, walked in, had a message just like this, set it down on this stand, got ready to teach, looked up, and all these kids are just looking at me, and right then Dr. Patterson walks in the room. That is what you call a Christian liar. Okay? He walks into the room and he's smiling because he has set me up. He has totally set me up. Taught for 30 minutes, got done, sat down, was exhausted, sweat through my clothes basically, wasn't even sure what I talked about or even if I did a good job. And then a small line of 5 kids was waiting there for me. The first one said to me, man, do you do that very often? I said, not really. And then he said, you should think about doing that more often. And then I looked in the back of the room, and Dr. Patterson was smiling. The next week, I had a job at that church. I worked there 5 years, because I did a victory lap in college. Not only that, want to hear something else? This happened this week. I haven't heard from that church in like 25 years. This week, that church bought 60 of my books to use with the men's ministry that they're starting this week. And they didn't even know that I used to work there, by the way. Okay, why do I tell you that story? Because it doesn't matter, bro. If God wants to use you, he's going to use you. Yeah. Use your voice, gather your men, and then just start talking. You might be walking into a 30-year career in ministry. You just don't know. But you can't do it convincing yourself that you're not worthy. All right? Right here.
How do you break, whether it's the 80-20 or the 90-10 rule, where 10 from your men do 90% of the work? It's the same, I feel like it's the same percentage of guys that show up at every event. How do you get in?
Yeah, you know, how I've started to do that is I've started to focus all of our ministry on younger men. Okay, let me tell you why. I'm a strategist, okay? So just take it for what it's worth. I am a father and a grandfather. And I have now hit a point in my journey where I realize that I can speak to multiple generations. So I became a grandfather about 6 months ago, and one of my good friends made a statement to me because he's a grandfather. He said to me, Vince, it's time for you to become the patriarch. And I was like, whoa, wow. And when he said that to me, all of a sudden my mindset shifted. It shifted. I started to think about, what does a patriarch do? How does he speak? How does he live his life? What are the things that he does? Well, he speaks back across multiple generations, doesn't he? Well, I realized if I can speak back to a younger generation of men, younger men, that it naturally is inclusive, and I mean that term not in the politically correct terms. I'm naturally inclusive of all generations, and then men can see what I'm doing with a younger generation and apply it across multiple generations. That's what I'm doing today. I am purposefully targeting men who are 25 years old, purposefully, in everything I do. Every devotional I write, every video I make, every book that I write, I'm trying to target men that are younger so that guys will go, I need to be doing that with my kids. I need to be talking with my grandkids. I need to be gathering a group of men like Vince gathers a group. That's how I do it. I've just started to ignore speaking only to older generations of men exclusively and only their issues and start incorporating those as a whole. And it allows, you see what it's doing? It's allowing multiple generations to participate more fully in the ministry. Make sense? Good question, Mitch. Yeah, right here. Oh, there. Yeah, thank you.
I wanted to ask this, as you said in February, this is when you got the idea to start this.
Mhm.
From February until you started, I'm sure there was a lot of nervousness. How did you overcome that to start?
Okay, so the question was, in February when I sat down with my wife and we kind of had this idea, and to the moment that I started, there was some nervousness. What did I do about that? Right? Okay, so here's what I did about it. I made one conscious step. Here's what happened. I went in to my church and I resigned my duties. Oh my gosh, I just want to let you know, I had a nice career in ministry and I was walking away from it. I mean, kind of in the 1 percentile of money and security and leadership and all that kind of stuff. And I walked in and I walked away from it. And then my church looked back at me and said, we're going to give you a 9-month severance. 9 months. In other words, they paid my salary and all my health insurance for 9 months. What happened there? Well, I took one step and God gave me 9 months. You see that? Because let's just get honest with ourselves. It's scary to take the first step because we're worried about all these subsequent steps. But it's only until we take the first step, that God can give us a declaration about all the coming steps.
Yeah.
All of them. No kidding. That same week, this is not a joke, that same week, a couple sat down to meet with me. They heard about what I was doing. I did not know who they were. They sat down, met with me at a Panera Bread in Vadnais Heights. If you know where it's at, on County Road E and 35E right there, sat down at a table. I'm like, what is this meeting about? We want to sit down with you and your wife. They asked me about the ministry. I didn't know, what they wanted to do, but they pushed a check across the table for $75,000.
Wow.
Not only that, this is true. On the 10th anniversary of that gift, I went back to that couple and I told them, that check is set in my account for the last 10 years. I haven't touched a penny of it. There's your answer. I believe so many men in this world are called to lead, but never take the first step. You know what the first step is? You have to go and decide what you're not going to do so that God can show you what He wants to do. That's what I learned from that. That all happened in just a few days. 9 months of severance and a $75,000 check. I'm not boasting in myself. I hope you don't hear that. This has nothing to do with me. That is God's provision. And I went back to that couple to confess it, and I was worried about it. I was worried. How would they feel about me just letting that check sit there for the last 10 years? They wept in front of me. And they said, for the first time, we felt like we gave to something that gave and extended back. I never came back for another gift. Not once to this day. Only to say, thank you. Thank you for releasing me in that home. Does that help? Okay. How much time we got? One more right here.
How do we as men of God reach out to the LGBTQ community in truth?
Anything else you want to add to that? That's it?
I feel as a church where, at least in my experience,
Very authoritative.
Yes, I see.
Comfortably so.
Yes.
we're almost like I feel like God is calling us in this time and age to go out and reach, where we're like we're drawing back, we're afraid and scared. I don't know your experience, but
It's a good question, though.
Okay, so I'm going to grab a hold of just a tiny bit of what you said, and then, because there's a lot there. I'm going to grab a hold of one word. It's love.
Mm-hmm.
The hardest thing, I think one of the most difficult things, and you're not going to like hearing this, by the way, but one of the most difficult things that I have a problem with in churches today from platforms like this is pastors who flippantly use the term, God unconditionally loves you. God does not unconditionally love you. God paid so that you might know His love. He paid for it with His Son, His life, His message, His death, His resurrection from the dead. The only thing that's unconditional about God's love is that it exists unconditionally apart from you. And the only way we can know it is through the sacrifice of his son. And that message right there is a message of love, of true, perfect love. And if we got that message right, then it would be easier to minister to any sinner who lives on the face of the planet. You're broken and sinful, and you need God's paid for, rich, wealthy, endless, yes, eternal, yes, but not unconditional love. If we got that message right from these platforms, then I think all people and all sinners would feel loved. Make sense? Not a good message, hard message, but it's true. It's true. All right. Do we want to end there, or you want to do something lighter right now? Anybody else have a question real quick? Yeah, right here.
I think it's helpful because, like, the question that I have is like, what is the best strategy to do men's ministry? I know you like talked about a lot of value, but like in a church, but
Yeah.
it seems like, you know, I'm from River Valley,
Yeah.
and ever since I've been at River Valley, long before I was a pastor, you put someone over men's ministry, and it never works because
Ever.
it seems like we're kind of all atypical, and even though we don't really need this, we're men, and we butt heads with the guy that's trying to lead,
Yeah, I know.
unless the lead pastor is over. So,
Yeah.
what would you say is, like, what have you seen and found and observed that seems to be just the best kind of, almost like sneaky strategy or strategy that works?
So, such a great question. I'm just going to reiterate it. What's the best strategy to use for men in a church? All right. So I'm going to let you guys know. I do talk to men's leaders all over the planet, literally all over the planet. I will let you know this: men's ministry is the most disorganized ministry on the face of the planet, for sure, because we are rogue and competitive, is why. And you know what? I believe God wants to leave it that way. Okay? I think God leaves it that way so that we will allow him to organize what we can't organize, because we're not God. So I use a phrase all the time, and maybe you might use this too, and I use this all the time just to keep myself humble and to remind other people to stay humble. God's men, God's mission, God's glory. They are God's men. I prayed this prayer this morning before I walked into this place. You are God's men on God's mission for God's glory. You are not mine. You do not belong to me. We are all sons of a father. I am not that father. The father is it, and you are his son, and we're in a brotherhood. And a loosely knit brotherhood that isn't very well organized, by the way. And all of us think we can do it better than everybody else, all right? But I would say this. In the churches that I visit across the country, the most successful men's ministries, and I'm using that term loosely, I'm actually using it to say not just men's ministry, but ministry to men. The most successful ministries to men in a church are led by a guy who cares about men. And every once in a while in his sermon, he drops something in. And he does one of these things. Gentlemen, this is for you. That works right there. Because then, guess what happens? I told this to you, Mitch, just a little while ago. Then the pastor is communicating that I care about men. And then the wife goes, that dude cares about men. So I'm bringing my man to church, right? And you get a little bit of this elbowing going on, and then he says, we got this event, and then that pastor goes to that event. Whether it's once in a while or annually, it doesn't matter, but I speak at men's events all over the country, and I will tell you, usually each year I will see only a handful of senior pastors at those events. Some of those events have a couple of thousand men. And I will rarely see a pastor there. Today we see one here. Of course, he's on the roll to teach. That helps a little bit, right? But that's important. That's important. I would also say, and I think this is key, we've got to really empower and disciple men to lead their tribes. Like, free them up to lead their tribes. Be a little looser with how they lead within the church and empower them with money and resources and equipment to go do those things. Often what I see, really what constrains men's ministry in a church, is an understanding that we have to do everything one way. Man, I just think we need to release men. Men are messy. You think I understood ministry when I got into it? Absolutely not. I was a mess. I blew some things up once in a while. I made some mistakes, but man, I want to release men into their calling. That's why I say to them, brother, go do it. Step into it, you know? Lean into it. Do something, but don't sit there and keep your mouth shut. You know, just go do it. And I think that's the way that we really gotta look at men's ministry as groupings of men. I also think it's important that a senior leader begins